Hej alle sammen. Undskyld på ikke snakker dansk. That is why my presentation for the rest will be in English, but I still hope you will enjoy it, and thank you for inviting me. I'm a medical technologist and not a medical doctor or registered nurse. I work for IMEC, and IMEC hires me to the Dutch Kidney Foundation for 5% of my time about, and another 5% to NeoKidney Initiative, which is working on an artificial portable kidney. 10% of my time I'm an associate professor in the UMC Utrecht at the nephrology department. I am the voluntary chair of Work Group 3 Breakthrough Innovation of the European Kidney Health Alliance, and I represent the Netherlands in IEC and ISO standardization organizations, in particular to write standards for hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis devices. Now I'm going to take you through history and looking upon hemodialysis machines, but also on computers. And you may ask yourself why? Well, that's going to be clear. Let us take a look at 1943, when Dr. Kolff did his first meaningful attempts with patients on his self-built hemodialysis machine. This is how it looked like. The filter is the biggest part of the machine, and there's only very little electronics in there, just a motor to rotate the device. And let's look upon a computer from 1943. That's a huge machine, and you even see only half of this machine. The other side is the memory size. This is a huge room full of electronics, so take that in mind. Now if we go to 1945, then we see Sophia Schaffstadt as the very first patient that really survived a uremic coma, but she had acute kidney failure. So the machine could temporarily take over her kidney function and help her just enough to survive from the severe infection that she had. 1945, a breakthrough. She survived a uremic coma and lived for many years after. So in 1945, quite soon after World War II ended in the Netherlands, Kolff could defend his doctoral thesis in Groningen. And he could come out in the open with his machine that until then he had secretly hidden from the Nazis. And he was so thankful that the Dutch were liberated from this terrible occupation that he made 4 extra machines on his own cost. He duplicated his successful machine, and he sent those 4 machines to Britain and to Poland, to Canada and the United States. Although his machines worked quite successfully, they only had a meaningful clinical working for acute kidney failure. The trouble was namely the vascular access. That was in those days very primitive. You see one of the transfusion sets from those days, and you can imagine that it's very hard to keep somebody with chronic kidney failure alive with such vascular access means. So that was a real problem, and that was only solved much later. In 1960, Wayne Quinton built the first AV shunt for Dr. Belding Scribner, and chronic dialysis became possible, saving the life of Clyde Shields, a machinist at Boeing. And here we see a flyer from the USA Health Education Department, and look upon how they explain uremia, which is quite nicely illustrated there. They also explained how the dialysis membrane looked like. They show typical examples like the keel membrane or the rotating washing machine equipment. And also they showed that, as an example, they used cheese, the holes in cheese, but then they said it's thousands of times smaller, those holes, and they even had a mouse on that flyer to example that. You notice that not all those holes are exactly the same size, and that will come back later on. Of course, in those days, patients were treated by diet, a strict restriction on water intake, and that was really hard, of course, always thirsty, nothing changed like that, and to avoid infections, which also still is nowadays actual. But of course, the US government said in 1967, there's also dialysis. And they already then, in 1967, said, well, you can do it in a center or you can do it at home. And note this interesting fact that in 1970, Germany had the world record because they had 100% home dialysis. Well, in fact, there were only a few patients, but all of them did it at home because that was cheapest. And the guy that was introducing hemodialysis in Germany, he was a commercial guy, and he meant it well with a few friends of him. He wanted to keep them alive, so he said the cheapest way to do this, Mr. Klaus Ketzler, keep that name in your memory, he said the cheapest way to do this is via home dialysis. 1967 was also the year where the hollow fiber-based dialyzers came to the market, and we still have them. But interestingly enough, you see that the size of the holes and the nanopores in the fibers are not all the same size, as was illustrated also by the cheese and mouse example in the flyer that you saw previously. Now, in that same year, also, NASA had its very first mainframe computer installed from IBM. And this is a scene from a movie, but taken with real good accessories to show. And what you see there on the card is a 5 megabyte hard disk, a miracle in those days. We will all laugh at the size of such a hard disk nowadays, but that was a miracle then. And here's a photograph of a lady doing home hemodialysis in the United States in 1967. As we see here, she has a keel dialyzer, and the machine has grown quite bigger than the machine part of Kolf had, but the filter still is quite big compared to the machine. There's also a heparin pump shown below at the card, and she's doing this at home. And now I'm coming back to my comparison between computers and hemodialysis machines. Now, isn't it weird that this computer tablet has become a billionfold better in performance, whereas the price went astronomically down and availability became much higher? Whereas the hemodialysis machine to the left, still indeed, it has been improved quite a bit, but maybe tenfold compared to the beginning. Certainly not a billionfold. So wouldn't it be time that we start innovating this in the same kind of inspiration that we had for the computer part? And we need that because we have a shortage of nurses, and in particular dialysis nurses are really, we're seeing a worldwide shortage of those nurses. So we need those. We need better equipment which is smarter to help the nurses treat more patients, preferably at home. And we also know that we have a global water shortage, and that's really bad. Even the Netherlands, come on, man. We have a lot of water, but still we have a few official droughts in the past 10 years, and that is very weird for our country. And if you look upon hemodialysis, which uses about 300 liters in 4 hours, whereas the whole human body can have 24 hours on 2 to 3 liters, there still is a big discrepancy in that. There's room for improvement. Same thing for energy. Hemodialysis sessions in 4 hours takes about 3 to 5 kilowatt hours, whereas the whole human body, the whole human body, not just the kidney, in that same period of time uses 0.3 kilowatt hours. Also there, room for improvement. Well, let's also talk about the plastic waste. There's a huge amount of plastic tubing each year that's going down the waste stream, whereas if we wouldn't need that, that would certainly help us to have a less big eco footprint for hemodialysis. So my opinion would be it's time to go back to the future and make home dialysis great again. We have to unlock the untapped potential. We really have neglected home dialysis assets in Europe. And if you want to read this article, you can click on the link that will be in the PDF. What we like to see, and we've talked to patients also, that Also patients from Denmark, as the famous Henning Søndergaard has also worked on this article. We'd like to see more wearable and even partly implantable hemodialysis systems. Can it be done? I think it can be done, but we need governments to agree that it should be done. Coming soon in the American Journal of Kidney Diseases is another article where also Henning Søndergaard from Denmark is co-authoring. Now let's also look a bit on PD. Peritoneal dialysis, of course, is a little bit simpler, and there's good news about that. The firm AWAC now has been renamed, but they have made a wearable PD machine which reuses the dialysate. Very handy, can be worn while you're doing the therapy. Another machine from the Netherlands is this one. It's the WeKit. That also can talk with your mobile phone, and you can do it overnight or take it with you while you go. And this is another wearable PD machine from Malaysia, which was developed there, solely built, developed, and produced in Malaysia. Also from the hemodialysis side, of course, we see machines that are more dedicated and designed for home use, which is good. But still, most of these machines, or all of these machines still, are single pass. That means they only use the dialysate once. Single pass machine, as the word says, use the dialysate only once. So a lot of water comes from the water line. It is purified. Then it is mixed with the right salts in the right concentrations. It's not unusual that you have 100 to 120 liters of water used for one session. And then, and you remember, if you have a reverse osmosis system, then only 1 liter dialysate requires 3 liters of good drinking water. Anyhow, that dialysate is only used once and then goes down the drain. That means a lot of water and a lot of heat, including the energy, electrical energy needed to make that, is going down the drain, and that's a pity. But a lot of water, and thus electricity, might be saved if we reuse the dialysate. And as you see here, the dialysate goes through the filter many times. You need a much smaller volume. A device that only uses 5 liters of dialysate is being CE marked at this very moment. You also lose much less heat because it stays warm. It only has to have a little bit of extra heat when it comes back to the patient. That is good news. You're saving water and saving electricity with such a principle, and you can make it smaller. And so this dialysate regeneration opens possibilities for miniaturization. Here we see 2 of the dialysate regenerating devices. One is the wearable artificial kidney from Dr. Gura. It's a belt-worn device, but it is quite a bit clumsy when you walk through a door and you may hook on the handle. But version 3 is on its way, which already looks much more sleek. Then the next kidney there, with the blood module left and the dialysate module right, is being CE marked at this moment. Both use dialysate regeneration and therefore can be so small. And that is not all that we will see. Still, what I describe now still requires the needle or the catheter to take the blood out of the body and then pass it through the machine. But what would be great if we would have hemodialysis without needles or an extracorporeal other blood circuit? Well, the patients, they fully agree. They say, oh, I'd like to have no needles, but how to do that? Well, our kidneys are doing it already, so it must be possible. And here comes a concrete example to increase health while saving money and saving our planet. Let's make that hemodialyzer with the fiber-based that already is more than 50 years on the market. Let's miniaturize that on chip. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. There's even 2 big projects already working on this. The kidney project that is going on in San Francisco and at Vanderbilt University, they were the first to start this. And they have pores in a slit form that can be tuned. The only trouble is there's a lot of desert between the pores, and there's also the KitNew project with next-gen high-tech and KitNew bundling forces in Europe, and they are working on, small holes, but very close to each other. Both projects are working on different ways to make the chips, but both work on chip-based filters. And look upon what's happening. This is a fiber-based filter in the middle, and you see that not all holes are the same size, but you see with the slits or with the holes, we both see that they are very, very much uniform in size, which makes the cutoff of these filters much more precise, which is good for the treatment. So if we would have a silicon filter that we could implant in the patient, then suddenly we only need half the size of the next kidney machine, for instance. We only need the dialysate circuit outside of the body, whereas we have an implanted dialyzer. No needles. And you would only have half of the size of the machine needed on the outside, which makes it even more travelable. And that's interesting because it saves a lot of waste. No plastic waste from the blood circuit anymore. Only the dialysate circuit is extracorporeal. No needles, less plastic waste, less energy use, less blood loss, of course, and probably also a much better safety, because if one of your dialysate lines would loosen outside of the body, you get a wet bed. But that's all. No blood loss to the environment. So the risk for the patients is also lower. And that would mean nocturnal hemodialysis would be much simpler and thus also much better for the patients. But one step more, and that's really future music, then we're talking about definitely beyond 2030. But still it could be done if we add a bioreactor as an artificial tubulus to this kind of principle. So we have a silicon filter as a glomerulus, but we have also a silicon filter plus cells on it as an artificial tubulus. Then we would have urine, artificial urine going down the drain into the bladder. And that would be great because then people could normally pee. That would be super, but hey, let's be reasonable. That will take longer time. The first step would be just the implanted filter. Nevertheless, this would be great in the future if the scan of the airport would say, hey, wait a minute, something suspicious, and the guy would say, hey, it's just my artificial kidney. I can go to the plane. It's not a bomb. That would be great. If that's your only problem as a kidney patient, well, you take that problem. So here is what the future might look like: an implantable silicon-based filter and electronics on the outside that wirelessly can charge the electronics on the inside and wirelessly communicate to have data from the sensors that are inside, so that doctors and nurses plus the patient themselves would have a view on how it's going in there and how their health parameters are developing. And that would certainly help to make it cheaper and also more accessible, plus that frequent nocturnal dialysis would be much easier. But to actually come to that point will require investment. And here we come to the famous triangle of technological project management. Namely, if you want high quality, and we want high quality, it's not negotiable. For medical devices, high quality is simply a must. So that's one thing that we have to do. Then you can choose one other point of the triangle, and the other one is automatically excluded. Of course, the patients want to have it quickly. They say, hey, realize this as quickly as we can because we need it. But unfortunately, reality is that we have very, very little funding for making such a device. It's really a harsh reality. So there's a problem. But let me remember you of another moment in history. In 1962, President Kennedy of the United States of America announced a moonshot. It's our intention before the end of this decade to bring a man to the moon and return him safely to Earth. And guess what? They did it. They really did it. But not for $25. They really put a lot of money in there. But once they were determined that it should be done and the funds were there, they really got the job done. And there was a moon landing indeed before the end of the decade. Now that illustrates that if mankind wants to achieve something and really puts its shoulders behind, it can do a huge amount of things, incredible miracles. So I say the triangle of project management should work, but we need a Kennedy moment that somebody from the politicians, preferably international, would say, hey, as mankind, we need such a device. We need an artificial implantable, or at least partly implantable kidney. Let's put our shoulders all behind this and get it done. The technology, in principle, already is there. It has to be engineered, developed, and integrated. We need a Kennedy moment, and who's going to give us that? Well, that's interesting. We need politicians with a view on the future that are daringly. I'd like to thank you all for inviting me to do this lecture, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there physically, but I hope this movie also helps you. If anybody wants to contact me for questions, well, my contact details are on the slide, and there's a few other things I'd still love to mention to you. Namely, in Kampen, in the Netherlands, where it all started with Dr. Kolf's wonderful machine, there's going to be a meeting on June 24th, coming year 2025. We will celebrate 80 years of hemodialysis and 65 years of the AV shunt. It's going to be on the place where it all was there. The original hospital is still there, and even the original hospital doctor's room of Dr. Kolf has been preserved. This is going to be a unique moment in time where many experts that are working on innovative kidney replacement therapies will be there. It's a pre-program also of the European Society for Artificial Organs, and if anybody would like to come, look on the website of the Willem Kolf Foundation. We're going to talk about the past, the present, and the future of kidney replacement therapies on that conference. And the only last thing I'd like to say is there's a climb against time action from one of our PhD students in Utrecht. That's Tugrul Irmak. He's a mountaineer also by hobby, but also he did dialysis and now has a transplanted kidney. And he wants to climb many mountains and raise money for the research on artificial kidneys. That's why it's called the Climb Against Time. Anybody interested, scan the QR code and you'll find more about this wonderful action. Thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to record this and I hope you enjoyed it. Bye bye.